Let's hear it from that.
Are we live?
Yep.
Hey! Welcome, everybody, to the book shop in Lerwick. Greetings to anyone in Damanhur who's listening. Convoy to you. To anybody who's tuned in from the 69ers, all hail Eris, all hail Discordia. And to anyone else, good evening and welcome to the Bop Shop for this very special launch of two new books about subjects close to my heart. So we'll begin with a message from one of our clan. Oops, there we go. If we knew why, we wouldn't be doing it. And that's really the message of the night. That's the story of the night, because we're going to learn about wonderful things that people have done. And if they knew why they were doing them, well, maybe they wouldn't. By the man who burned £1 million. This quote, Bill Drummond of the KLF. And he can perfectly justify the burning of the £1 million. Damanhur, we discovered in a synchronistic way. Myself and some chums happened to be in that part of the Alpine region, looking at various things in France and Switzerland. And it turned out there wasn't a story in any of the things we were looking at. And then we heard about Damanhur, and we went along there, and believe me, we were completely blown away. And I wrote a book about it. They paint their houses nice there. And they build open-air temples. And they build underground temples. I asked the founder of Damanhur at the time when I was first there in 98, what should I put on the cover of the book? And he said, buckets, because they carried out 3 million buckets full of debris from there. And Ken always asked the question, what did you do with all the stuff that was in the buckets? And Alberto simply said, poof. That lump of rock that you were looking at there became that, which is called the Hall of Metals. And a wonderful place it is too. And there's a construction going on that became the Hall of Water. Magic place to emphasize the feminine. That's the whole of the earth. Most impressive part of the building. That's another view. And that's the sun door. This is an actual door, and it opens around the circular part of that goes in. Beautiful. Tiffany glass. They did a whole load of work with Tiffany glass. That's one of the paintings inside the Earth Hall, and it represents the battle against the enemy. And the enemy is inside all of us. And so the people in this picture, unlike most frescoes that you see, they're people that I knew at Damanhur, real people whose portraits are there. And the enemy is represented by these grey figures, and they're coming in their hordes. And the enemy is inside of us. That's where the enemy is, and we have to fight him. And that's the message of that particular mural. But the halls are filled with wonderful paintings like that are done in quite remarkable ways, because sometimes an idea will be posited by someone, and then they'll talk about it, and then they'll go home and they'll dream about it, and then they'll come back and talk about it some more. Then they'll go away and dream about it some more, and then they'll start painting it. And most of the artwork inside the temples happen like that. There's the grand old man of time. Now, just round the corner from where the grand old man of time is, when I first went there in 1998, there was a hole in the wall, and when you look through it, there was just rock, solid rock, facing you inside the wall. I went again 6 months later, and the solid rock had turned into that. So that's the second earth hole, which is on a lower level. And the representations in this are the history of humankind in all its glory. And you see these figures around the bottom there. They're each Damanhurian citizen produces their own figure. And it doesn't have to be realistic. It can be whatever, it can be an archetype or, but all the figures, once they've been fired, go inside the temple and remain there all the time. That's the Hall of Mirrors, and you go in there and you can see into infinity, because reflection on reflection on reflection, and it's the most beautiful place I've ever been in. And that ceiling is all in Tiffany glass, thousands of pieces of Tiffany glass. It's one of the largest ever made. Cupola dome. Gorgeous. And that's underground, but lit from behind by artificial light, but artificial light created by the sun, because everything is solar powered in Damanhur. And there you are. That's the extent of what they built, to give you an idea of the vastness of it. It's the most amazing place on God's earth. There you are, there's the mountain above. It's in the foothills of the Alps, in the Valticella. And that's the man who was the founder of it. Sadly, he's no longer with us in person, but I'm sure he's with us in spirit. And he was a wonderful man, very calm-natured. The first time I went to Damanhur, I was being shown around by a lovely lady called Hesperide. And we went through all the rooms, and this man was following with a set of keys, and occasionally had a remote control that opened a secret passage door and things like that. And then we got to the central room, where we were due to meet Alberto Heraudi, the founder, and interview him. And we sat down and we said, "Where's Alberto?" And it was the guy who'd been following us around. And I thought he was just some janitor or something. But in actual fact, he was the man himself, the man who founded it. And he was that sort of man. No big front natured, ego. He was a man who did things, but he did things with other people and for other people. And that's a very important message that he's left us, doing things with and for other people. We'll come on to an extension of that later on. So I wrote a book about it. It started off with a HarperCollins book called Damanhur, The Real Dream. And then when that came out in paperback, it was called Damanhur, The Community They Tried to Brand a Cult, which, as you can imagine, there was a lot of uproar because they built the Temples of Humankind in secret for 16 years. And people who actually lived in Damanhur, who joined, who didn't know about it, were taken in there when they'd been there long enough to gain their trust. They were taken in blindfolded and then shown what a wonderful place was being dug out underneath them. And then this was republished in America as the story of the extraordinary Italian artistic and spiritual community. And that's still available, that book, even though it was published 20 years ago. And I've now written another book, 20 years on. And the reason I've written this other book is in the strapline there, because Damanhur has decided that it's going to reach out into the world. I mean, they've been a closed community and people have joined and it's grown, but it's always been contained within itself. I mean, there are Damanhur centres in other parts of the world. There's even one in Australia now, and I think there's some people listening in from Australia. But they've decided now that it's time for Damanhur to reach out to the world and pass on the things that they've learned over the last 40 years. And so the thing I want to tell you about tonight, the social alchemy. We've seen some of the magical temples, and the superindividual. And this is a very interesting notion that we'll come on to in a wee while. So let's start off with the social alchemy. There's always been, well, there were three strands to begin with: the school of meditation, which is now renamed meditation, the game of life, and the social aspects of the community. But then they added this fourth one, technicato. And the school of meditation is a traditional school of meditation, a secret school, an esoteric school. Now, in the time of Pythagoras, the esoteric and the exoteric were dependent on whether you were inside the veil with the people who knew, or whether you were outside the veil trying to find out what the people inside the veil knew. School of meditation was an esoteric school, so you were an initiate into it, and you became you progressed through various levels of learning and finding what life was about for you in a spiritual and artistic way. That is no longer a secret school. The University of Damanhur is now opening up with this medit action, and anybody can participate in the philosophy of the old school of meditation. And there's loads and loads and loads of stuff online. There are courses left, right, and centre that you can do. And the game of life is exactly that. At the beginning of Damanhur, before, while the building was in its early stages, there were a series of journeys that Alberto Araudi took people on. And on these journeys, they did all sorts of games, but games that resulted in personal development and personal growth. And the game of life became an actual positive strand for being in Damanhur. On its simplest level, the people at Damanhur take on different names. They take on a spiritual name, but you don't just have the name. You have to prove yourself worthy of that name. And to begin with, you take an animal name. And so I know people who are called Pineapple and Gorilla and Orango and Warthog and all sorts of people like that. But then they get, after a period of time, a vegetable plant name. And so Orango is Orango riso, and Asperity is butterfly pineapple. So Asperity ananas. And, you know, it sounds odd, but it works, you know. I used to go to a Gurdjieff school, and one of the things that we had to do there was there were banned words, and the banned word changed every month. And in conversation or in speech or in delivering a lecture, trying to avoid those words, particularly if it was a common word, was one of the most difficult things to do. But it really made you think about what you were saying. And in the same way, the adoption of this name, animal and plant, and now they're moving on to mineral names as well. So they'll have 3 names, and some people already have. And then there's all sorts of other things in the game of life. So one of the things in the development of the community was they had a battle of the arts, and everybody had to go away in their little social groupings and do some artwork. And there would be a theme sometimes. So one of the themes was dinner. So at the dinner, they had to make the table, the chairs, the tablecloths, the plates, the cutlery, everything had to be made in an artistic way. And some of the resulting things were just phenomenal. And there was a whole series of episodes like that, games, but games with a purpose towards the development of life. And the social aspects were based around living groupings, like a family grouping, but it wouldn't just be a family. They call them nucleos, and there might be a couple, another couple with some children, some old people, some young people who were married, and some, a whole mixture of people in a grouping. And then those social groupings were part of a region, and then the region formed the whole of Damanhur. So a very specific social structure with a set of norms and values and mores that they developed themselves. And we'll have a look at some of those in a wee while. And Technicato is the move towards doing things with and for other people, doing things on a level of reciprocation where people look after each other and do things for each other and come together in a marvelous way. Each person decides on a particular way that they'd like to follow, but these are not dogmas. These are not dogmatic ways. These are ways that help you towards doing something meaningful, but using your own way of doing it. You develop your own way within a way. So the way of the word, for example, is all those things that are to do with communication. And if anybody's involved in communication, they would tend to go in the way of the word. But it's not prescriptive. You can move around in the ways, or you can stay in one way and be a developer of that particular way, the way of the arts, creative arts, and so on. And the way of work is the Technicato one. It's the development of activities and service, the doing things with and for other people. And then there are the quests, the quesiti. Now, each of these, there's now 8. Those 8 have been developed over 40 years. So they spent 6 months probably on the first quesito, looking at it inside out. And it was, the theme of it was all about action and choice, but every which way meaning of those terms. Every which way you can do action, every which way you can make choices that are good and choices that are bad, and so on. And then in the second quesito, you take what you've learned in the first, but add into it an element of consistency and continuity. So when you start something, you finish it, and when you're doing something, you develop it, and so on. And then the third one, a very important one, is change. And Alberto Audi was a very firm believer in change. You should never become complacent with what you're doing. You should never be happy where you are. You should always be looking at the next step. And the best way to move into the next step is to change in some way. So it's not forced, but it's you using your own will to find a way that you can change to make your life more meaningful. And then the fourth quesito, discovering your feminine side. So for 6 months or so, the whole community thought what that meant. How do you discover your feminine side? How do you work out what's feminine and what's masculine within inside you? And how do you develop your application of the feminine side? And then followed the masculine energies, but in comparison to what you've already explored in the feminine. So attention is given next to those masculine energies that exist inside all people, men and women. And then the sixth quesito, and again, 6 months spent uniting those feminine aspects and those masculine aspects. So you become a more round person. And then the seventh quesito is the abandonment of dogma and certainties. Chance, synchronicity, all these things are very important tools to work with. And unlike religious rigidity, there is no dogma in Damanhur. There is no certainty in Damanhur. Everything is in a state of flux. Everything is on the move. And then the eighth quesito is, as I said, the love and the teaching towards others. And the completely new and latest development, although it's based on some very, very ancient traditions, is the Vanya project. And it's about divine love and intelligence. Represents the path towards the original spiritual unity to which we all belong. It is the conscious return to the spiritual dimension, which is the source and the container of all that exists, has existed, and will exist. In that there is no time, no space, no matter. In Damanhurian tradition, it is. Not nice? And the superindividual. I was fascinated when I first heard about this. Now that's a murmuration, and starlings normally do it. I'm not sure what birds they are. Just pick that image up, but starlings do it and other birds, and they move in patterns, but they move together, and the leader or the leaders of the group of birds changes, and as they change, the pattern changes, and but it's always in a unity of one. And there's another concept called Gestalt therapy, was a very strong part of the early growth movement. And Gestalt is when the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And if anything ever represented Damanhur, of the whole being more than the sum of its parts, well, that's it. The super individual. It's where a group of people come together and become as one, do things as one, achieve things as one. And you can achieve much more in this capacity of the super individual, in the oneness of it, than it's possible to do as an individual. And that's why the term super individual came into being. And it's not related to the Nietzschean thing about Superman and all that, you know. This is about groups being together and being as one. I love it. That's the labyrinth. And the labyrinth is undergoing some radical new changes. It's a vast series of corridors, and all these windows that you see, and they've researched every spiritual entity throughout the history of humankind, and on each one a god or a goddess or a spiritual being or a spiritual entity is represented. And each window is dedicated to that particular spiritual entity. But the new artwork that is appearing in the labyrinth is absolutely phenomenal. And that's Horus, who's was painted in the last few years. And there's a Mongolian goddess. Beautiful painting. And this room is very special. It's called the Temple of the Peoples, and it represents the peoples of the earth. Now, this is a portion of the ceiling part of it, and around the whole extent of the scene, in a very large chamber, there are representatives from all the nations of the earth in their little family grouping and with the sort of animals that they tend to have with them. And it's just absolutely marvelous. I was lucky enough to spend a few hours in there writing about it, and in the book it's there. I mean, I was so overwhelmed that I started breaking out into sweats, and I had to take my shirt off, and I felt quite embarrassed, even though I was on my own, you know. But it was just so beautiful, and it overwhelms you, you know, the beauty of it. And there's another part. I mean, it's just gorgeous stuff, isn't it? Eh? And this connection with the peoples of the world is a very important new development in Damanhur, reaching out to the world. And what's happening at the moment is a lot of indigenous people are being encouraged to come, or some just turning up under their own initiative because they've heard about it somewhere, and they turn up, and they Hopi Indians and shamans, and they built these wonderful stone spirals called circuits that you they put all these boulders down in huge. I mean, there are miles of it all over the mountainside above the Temples of Humankind. There are these circuits, and there's probably 10,000 or more boulders, you know, been used in the development of them. And you walk a spiral and meditate as you walk in. And when you get to the center, you hope you've fulfilled what you were meditating about. In this particular spiral, which is called the crystal spiral, on every boulder, there is a crystal. And some of those are from other parts of the world. And crystal has a particular magic about it. And I mean, the energy in there, you feel it when you go in. And a lot of indigenous people come and perform their own rituals in there that they would normally perform in other places, both to receive and to give energies into that spiral. And it's part of their journey with Damanhur, and a very important part, because the indigenous peoples of the world are finally being recognized. I mean, the oppression that went on by the Western societies going out into the world and creating mayhem, really. And now it's the time of the indigenous people. And see, there was a story the other day that I put up on my Facebook of a tribe of American Indians who, after 80 years, have just got the rights back to their land that they were promised 80 years ago. I've written another book as well, or I haven't written it. This book was written by a super individual, and it's called The Pilgrim's Super Individual. And I only edited their words and added a wee bit to it as well. Immanentizing the eschaton was the theme of our pilgrimage journey. Hi, pilgrims. That's Peter O'Halloran, Liverpool man. And he read a book. He read a book called Memories, Dreams and Reflections by Carl Gustav Jung. And in that book, Peter O'Halloran found that Jung had written about a dream. And it was a dream about Liverpool. It was about Liverpool being the pool of life. And he described certain things. And Peter O'Halloran spent years of his life going into every nook and cranny of Jung's thinking about this idea of Liverpool being the pool of life. And he discovered that it was about waterways, and there was a waterway point that Jung had described in his dream that is underneath Liverpool, and it's underneath a manhole cover in Matthew Street. Now, Matthew Street is a very important street in Liverpool because it's the street where the cavern was and where all the great things in Liverpool happened. Matthew Street was the place to be, and Peter decided that this was what Jung's dream was in reality. It was the pool of life that existed in Matthew Street. And he acquired an old property, an old broken down warehouse, and he turned it into the Liverpool School of Language, Music, Dream and Pun. And a wonderful place it was. It was called Untwackies because on the ground floor they sold second-hand goods. And now they called second-hand goods antiques. They weren't necessarily antiques, but, you know, they were old stuff. And so antiques in the Scouse, and antiques, Untwackies. And so there was this market on the ground floor with all the second-hand stuff. And on the upper floor was like a cafe parlor where the great and good of Liverpool used to come and talk philosophy. And Peter O'Halloran would regale them about his researches into Liverpool being the pool of life and Jung dream in it. And they put a bust of Jung onto this building. It's no like it. Well, it is there now, but it's a pub and it's called Flanagan's. But the bust is still there outside Flanagan's. So if you ever go to Liverpool, find Flanagan's pub, and there you'll find where the Liverpool School was. King Campbell, my friend. I met Ken Campbell in 1969. And he had a road show then that was becoming quite well known. They used to go into pubs and clubs and do all sorts of amazing things. And there were some good people in the road show. Bob Hoskins was a member of the road show. And Sylvester McCoy. Sylvester McCoy was actually called Kent Smith, but he played a character called Sylvester McCoy. It was based on a Belgian music hall song called "My Brother Sylvester" with a row of 30 medals on his chest, and so he adopted this name, Sylvester McCoy. And then some journalists wrote about him, and they called him Sylvester McCoy. So he became that, and then he became the seventh Doctor Who. All right, yeah, that's with me having bad eyes. So Ken met with Peter Harligan, and Peter said, "Why don't you do a show in our Liverpool school? That would be wonderful." And Ken had just met with Brian Aldiss and been to some science fiction conventions. And he decided he quite liked the science fiction writers because they laughed a lot. And they also drank a lot. And so he became interested in creating a theatre of science fiction. And so was born the Science Fiction Theatre of Liverpool. And they were to put a show on upstairs in O'Halloran's warehouse. Now, Ken went back to London and he was looking around for stuff that he might turn into a play. And he had a whole bunch of science fiction novels. And as he was coming out of Compendium Bookshop, he saw that in the newly arrived books. And it had come from America, Dell Books in America. And it was called Illuminatus, the Eye in the Pyramid. And on the cover was a picture of a yellow submarine. So there we are, man. We've got to do this one. It turned out that this was the first of a trilogy of books, Illuminatus, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. And so Ken spent time working with whoever turned up who wanted to be in what he termed, it will probably be the greatest show on planet Earth. And people turned up and they finished up with about 43 people playing something like 350 different parts. I mean, Illuminatus, if you've not read Illuminatus, it is the mother of all conspiracy novels. It is wonderful stuff. And so he did it. And the other person he met was Bill Drummond. And he cajoled Bill Drummond, who just left art school, into building the sets. This is back in 1976. This is before KLF and all that. And when Bill asked what the budget was, Ken said there is no budget. You just go out and find what you can and build it. And so, oh, there you are. There's a photo. This was in the Savoy Hotel, and there's Ken Campbell, me with hair, Robert Anton Wilson, and Irving Rappaport, wonderful man. And the picture was taken by John Joyce. Now, sad to relate, I'm the last survivor on this planet. They've all gone off to better things, I think. But Robert Anton Wilson was the man. And when he and Ken met, there was magic. So Bill came up with this idea about small sets that actors had to climb into. And my God, it worked. Because when this show was put on in Antwackies, I mean, it was in a small cafe parlor, you know, and you had 43 actors playing 350 parts, and you had some audience crammed into every nook and cranny that there was. And so there was only room for small sets. And this was a novel way to do it, a fantastic way to do it. And yeah, wonderful, Bill. And that's Prunella G, who was Ken's wife. And she played Eris in the show. And when the Eris speech began, you know about Eris, do you? She of the golden apple. Eris is the goddess of discordia, and she threw the golden apple into all the gods and goddesses, and they all fought over it and started the Trojan Wars. And so when she starts the speech, she's just an ordinary person, but she was standing on a forklift truck, and as the speech went on, the dress got longer and longer until she's, I don't know, 30 foot in the air, something like that. Isn't that wonderful? Now this becomes relevant later. That's why I wanted to show you that. Peter Hall, Sir Peter Hall, who ran the National Theatre, heard about this wonderful show that was happening in a cafe parlour in Liverpool. And he sent some people up to check it out. And lo and behold, it opened the new Cottesloe Theatre. And it ran there for several months. So from a small cafe parlour in Liverpool to the biggest prestigious theatre in Britain, they say. This is Daisy Campbell being born, or just after she was born. And she was conceived during Illuminatus. And she was called Daisy Eris Campbell as a special tribute. And Daisy is the person behind all this adventure. She wrote a play based on another of Robert Anton Wilson's books, Cosmic Trigger. That went on at the Cockpit Theatre in London, and it was an amazing show. And it was also done in Liverpool as well. Daisy came up here and she did her version of her dad's one-man shows that was called Pigspurt's Daughter. Now, Ken did a one-man show called Pigspurt that was on at the National Theatre along with all these other plays. And Pigspurt was like an alter ego character of his. And and Daisy learned that a Czech theatre director, when he'd met Daisy as she was grown up now, said that Daisy would go farther than her father. And so in order to go farther than her father, she dreamed up this idea of imitating the eschaton. And it would begin at Cernabas. Cernabas is the chalk giant with his nice erection there. And and it was to go from Cernabas, from Cern the giant, to Cern in Switzerland, on the Swiss-French border, where the Large Hadron Collider is. And so the theory was that we would go to immanentize the eschaton on top of the CERN Large Hadron Collider, and thus save the planet and probably the universe. So we went from the Hardon to the Hadron. Taking in Young's house at Bollingen in Switzerland. And we all had a tarot card apiece, and we all had magic names as well. And there was a proper tarot pack in a case and everything. And everybody designed their own one.
Is that you? Yeah, eating the onion. Yeah.
That's me, yeah.
The sage with onion.
The sage with onion, yeah. And here we are. We've got there the creatrix, the fire and the pot, the authenticator, and the pillock. And there were 69 of those, obviously, you know, because even the bus drivers had some. From CERN to CERN, where were you when the immanentized the eschaton? We had a pilgrim's guidebook, we had a song sheet, we had everything. T-shirts, tarot cards, the whole caboodle. Magic names. So at Cernabas, we did a ritual, and it was a fun thing, as you can see. And it had a meaning to it, but it escaped me. But it was wonderful. Here we are singing from the song sheet. This is
Yeah.
Sorry.
I said that's Daisy there with the coat with the stars on, Daisy Campbell.
Yeah, that's Daisy. Yeah, sorry. And that's Kermit Leveridge, who was in Black Grape. I think he's been to Shetland, hasn't he? Performed at Merrifield. We were treated to music of the plants. Now this is Larry from Liverpool, and he's been with Illuminatus. He was there in Liverpool when Illuminatus was put on, and he's been with the fraternity ever since. And he part of Jung's dream that O'Halloran had researched was about a magnolia tree. There was a magnolia tree. And so Larry brought with him several magnolia plants to be planted at all the places where we did rituals. So one was at Cernabas, one was in Damanhur, one was in Young's Garden, one was in Cern. And we plugged the machine that makes the plants make music into the magnolia plant, and we had magnolia music. Larry's a wonderful man. We put on a pilgrim's opera that was done on probably 2 hours rehearsal, if that. But it was the most spectacular thing. And the people at Damanhur absolutely loved it, you know, and joined in and shouted and screamed and did all sorts of wonderful things. Kermit being Shiva. And there's Michelle, the chanteurs. She had her own card, and she sang, Is That All There Is? Was a theme that ran through it. And also Rock On with the Hard On. Rock On with the Hadron. There was CERN. We went above it, and this was our CERN ritual. Now we'd spent all the time on the journey from Damanhur to CERN, cutting up the dress that Daisy's mum had worn when she played Eris, and it was cut into 23 sections. And because the number 23, the lower fives and the number 23 are all part of the Illuminatus mythology. And so there's all the Damanhurians, the pilgrims doing the dance that they learned from the Damanhurians, which was the message of the immanentization. And then 23 of us each held a piece of that and moved in a circle. And if you dig around on the internet, you'll find that this was taken from a drone. And there's a moving image of all that happening. Marvelous. And everywhere, it's all over. I collapsed in the heat with heat stroke. And then we went to Young's Garden. And this man who's standing up is called Eric Madden. And he runs a place called K Mabon in Brecon. And it's like a retreat in a forest with all wooden huts and things. But he's also a great authority on Old English poetry. And so he recited for us in Young's Garden an extract from the prophecies of Merlin. And there's extracts from that in the book. And there we are. Larry planted a magnolia tree, and all sorts of things were done to magic stones and all sorts of things in Young's Garden. It was a wonderful day, very hot day. And there we are. There's a super individual who put together that whole journey with them all contributing, with them all becoming friends with each other, because a lot of us didn't know each other on this trip. And it all came together with people making their individual contributions, but everything being drawn together by the enthusiasm of being part of a group. And now they all say, don't you guys, that we're a super individual, and we're called the 69ers. And there is a 69er Facebook page that's well worth visiting. Well, there we are. That was the stuff, and that's the content of my 2 books. Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll say to the people at Damanhur, convoy. And we say to the people, 69ers, have a nice life. And we'll say to people in Australia, thanks for tuning in. And, well, isn't it a wonderful day? A wonderful day. Ken Dodd used to say. A wonderful day for learning about a super individual.
So, Jeff.
Yes.
To be able